And so after that ceremony, I was walking down from this mesa, totally in the dark. And at a certain point, I had a vision in my third eye of this property that had a mountain here and some trees here and a golden meadow here and 2 giant pine trees behind me. And this was a very, very clear vision. And then a voice said to me that I would spend the end of my life there. So this is Ganesh, the elephant-headed god who protects the gateway, guards the gate and protects women. So he protects our cannabis plants, protects us. It's okay, it's okay. Okay, vámonos por aquí. Buenos días, yo me llamo SWAMI Chaitanya. Y bienvenido a mi finca en las montañas de Norte California. ¿Debo hablar en castellano o puedo hablar en inglés?
Si quieres en inglés.
¿Inglés está bien inglés? Porque, yeah, because I don't have all the scientific words in Spanish for this and so on. But cannabis was always just part of what was happening in San Francisco. It was very easy to score a lid, or as we called it in those days, half an ounce, on the street, on Haight Street in San Francisco. People would be walking up and down and saying, lids, lids. And of course you couldn't be sure, you know, first of all, you had to make sure it wasn't just oregano or sage or something like that. But, you know, and that was weed from Mexico for sure. It was Mexican weed. You know, at first I didn't really know too much about how to grow cannabis, and then I started, well, actually I grew my first cannabis right in San Francisco. Right in the heart of San Francisco in Telegraph Hill and North Beach in 1977 and 78. I had 13 plants, and they all got to be about that big, and that's how I paid my rent. But I actually started growing up here in 2004, so it's been, what, 18 years I've been growing in the same place. And over time you really sort of dial in, you really understand what works here, what doesn't work here. You know, you try things and they don't work out, you make a mistake and something happens, and pretty soon you've kind of made most of the mistakes and then you start to sort of improve your thing. There's so many phases of cannabis. There's the amending the earth and preparing the beds, right? Then there's selecting the genetics, right? And then after that, there's providing the nutrients at the right moment, not too much, not too little, and when it's needed, right? And how much water and so on. And then, you know, are you then keeping track of the pests and the pathogens and getting them, or doing preventative things so you know you got a powdery mildew, so what do you do to prevent it before it happens? And then at harvest time, when's the exact moment, right? Well, basically, the preparation of the soil is really one of the key things. We operate on the principle is that the soil grows the cannabis and I grow the soil, right? And so we're calling this a form of cultivation agriculture. We call it regenerative agriculture. And it's actually a couple of steps beyond organic, right? I'm not sure what you call it, organic in Mexico, biologic or something like this? Organico. Mm-hmm. And so what it is we try and use all natural ingredients, certainly organic ingredients, and sometimes minerals that are mined. So all of those ingredients are all natural ingredients, they're organic ingredients, and they're increasing the fertility of the soil over the years. And every year we try and put back what we take out, right? And so it's very different from most of industrial agriculture, which uses a lot of chemical ingredients and uses nitrogen, phosphorus, and various other things that are made from petroleum products and so on. And over time, this actually has a negative effect on the soil. So if you want me to go into this really deep, the idea is that the soil itself is alive. right? We call it living soil. And how is it alive? Well, it's alive because there are bacteria. The smallest little things are in the soil. And then a little bigger than the bacteria are all these different little fungal spores, fungi, right? And then we have these tiny little creatures that are called nematodes. And then we have arthropods and paramecium and amoebas and ciliates and flagellates. All of these are little creatures. Some are one cell, two cell, some are complex creatures. We have worms, we have beetles and bugs. All of these things are in the soil. And each one of those living things, whether it's a small one cell or two cell or a long worm, each one has its place where it's the ideal place. And we call that area underneath, we call that the root sphere. The word actually is rhizo. Rhizo means root, root sphere. So around the roots of a plant, whatever plant it is, there's kind of a sphere of microbial, fungal activity. And this is where all this stuff is happening. So as stuff falls onto the soil, say we put leaves or wood chips and so on, eventually it gets put down, and now bacterial action, fungal action is taking these things and changing their chemical nature and changing them into something that the roots can absorb, right? I think the thing that I learned recently, which really astounded me, and that is that not only do roots pull things out of the ground and take them up to use them as nutrients, but roots also put things out. They exude, it's called exudation, exude. They exude sugar. And so they make sugar by the nutrients that they bring up from the sunlight and the water and all these things. It's a huge process, and they put out sugar. Why do they put out sugar? The sugar brings the bacteria, right? And when the bacteria come, then the fungi come. And the fungi need the carbon from the sugar, right? And so the bacteria are getting energized by the sugar. The carbon make their long filament hyphae from the sugar, and now everything starts to move. And then the nematodes come and they eat the fungi and so on. So all these things are all interrelated, interdependent. And we call it the soil food web. It's a web of interacting organisms, all relative and related and all depending on one another. Well, I'm still in the process of making this construction, but if you want to see, this is the brew tank, and this is the air bubbler, and it pumps air through and it makes this huge vortex and bubbling and so on. And what that does with the ingredients that are in there, it increases the microbial life. So if you take some of that water from the lake water, and then we put in the alfalfa and a couple other things, a little tiny bit of compost and maybe a tiny bit of worm castings, you look under a microscope and you can see the actual life in the water. There's a little bit of bacteria, there's some nematode, there's all these different things, right? Now, after 24 hours on a warm day, you look again, and all those things will be 1,000 times, 10,000 times more. They just because of the oxygen, right? So that's what we call an aerobic brew tank, right? Now, if you were to stop doing that and just cut it off, it would very soon turn anaerobic and start to smell like rotten this and that and the other thing. On the other hand, a compost pile is pretty much an anaerobic pile, and it can smell really weird down there, but after it does its whole thing, this bacterial level, even you go in the compost and you dig it up and it smells sweet. Right? So there's these different operations. This is a brew tank of brew aeration and oxygenation, and the compost pile is a different kind of process. They both work to create microbial life, right? Oh yeah, long season, full term. Because I grow one crop per year, right, in full sun, and I grow from seed. Now this year, for the first time, I'm trying some feminized seeds, but normally I grow from just the regular seeds, right, what they call phototropic seeds. Well, all of it together, the growing by the cycles of the moon, that's ancient. I mean, that's really ancient. And even American farmers in the colonial time, up until maybe 100 years ago, they all planted by the moon cycle, right? And it's ancient all over the world. And so many places they have religious ceremonies on those moon cycles. Spring and fall and full moon and so on and so forth. And so that's part of the ritual. And when you do that, now you're connected with the Earth's timetable. The moon has its cycle and the sun has its cycle, the equinoxes and so on. And when you're in with that, we plant our cannabis when everything else is, that's when when everything else is coming up in the spring, that's when we start our cannabis. So it gets the momentum of springtime. And when is that? It's after equinox in the spring, and it's as the waxing moon is in April, right? And everything else at that time is going. When we first plant, the trees don't have any leaves, but they're just starting to bud, right? There's no flowers in the garden, but they're just starting. And so that whole momentum in the spring, and then you're connected with the earth cycles, right? And harvest is the same at the end, right? If you want to do more natural things, then you can make your own compost teas, you can have a worm bin, you can have a compost pile, and most of these don't really take up that much room. You can reduce them onto a very small scale. And then my problem has been to bring it up to a scale where instead of 5 gallons, I'm doing 300 gallons of compost tea. So now I need a big, big bubbler. But if you're doing a little one, just a tiny little thing for an aquarium about this big, and you can do that, and you can start doing that. So, and then you can find out what works and what doesn't work, sort of an experiment, right? And so you're starting to be regenerative in the fact that you're putting only organic materials that you've sourced, and you're putting them into the garden, and you're kind of taking control of it. And there are several principles of regenerative agriculture, and now, I can talk about this on a very simple level. There are people who know a whole lot more about it than I do, and I'm always learning from them, right? But the regenerative farming has based on the idea that the soil is alive and there's a food web starting from the smallest bacteria up to the biggest worm or bird or whatever it is, or chipmunk that's in the forest. And so that living soil web is what we need to keep alive in order to actually keep our planet alive. Y gracias a EXPO CANN de invitarme a participar en este YouTube y la filmación aquí en la finca. So anyway, you want me to talk about cannabis, so I better relight this joint, and just to sort of get a little inspiration here. Let's see.